Some of the most celebrated engineering innovations in automotive history are now completely illegal. You cannot buy them, you cannot install them, and in a few cases you will immediately understand why they had to disappear. These were not obscure failures from forgotten manufacturers. These were features that defined entire generations of vehicles, features that appeared in millions of cars, features that enthusiasts still talk about with genuine reverence. And every single one of them was quietly banned because they were killing people in ways the public never fully understood. Number 18 is something almost every performance car had in the 70s and 80s, and the reason it was outlawed is not what you think. Here is what actually happened. Leaded gasoline. This was not just a fuel additive. This was the foundation of high-performance engines for 5 decades. Every muscle car, every sports car, every performance vehicle built before the mid-70s ran on leaded fuel because it allowed higher compression ratios, prevented engine knock, and lubricated valve seats in ways that unleaded fuel simply could not match. The power gains were real, the engine longevity was real, and the neurological damage was catastrophic. Lead particles did not stay in the engine. They came out the exhaust pipe as microscopic particles that hung in the air, were breathed in by everyone near roads, and accumulated in the human body. Children living near highways had measurably lower IQ scores. The Clean Air Act amendments of 1970 started the phase out, and by 1996, leaded gasoline was completely banned for road use in the United States. Catalytic converters, which became mandatory in 1975, were immediately poisoned by lead, so the fuel had to go. Classic car owners genuinely mourn what was lost. Engines designed for leaded fuel require hardened valve seats or fuel additives to survive on modern unleaded. The performance was extraordinary. The public health cost was unacceptable. Both things were true at the same time. Solid steel non-collapsible steering columns. These were in every car built before 1968. A single steel shaft ran from the steering wheel directly to the steering box with zero give, zero flex, zero ability to absorb impact. In a frontal collision, the engine was pushed backward by the force of impact. That solid steel column became a spear aimed directly at the driver's chest. The steering wheel itself would punch through ribs, rupture organs, or cave in the sternum. Thousands of drivers survived the initial crash only to be impaled by their own steering column. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 204, implemented in 1968, required collapsible steering columns that would compress or fold in a crash instead of driving straight back into the driver. Modern columns have multiple collapse zones and breakaway mounts. The old ones had the structural integrity of a medieval lance. Beautiful machines, genuinely lethal design. That steel shaft is now completely illegal on any new vehicle. Rear-facing jump seats in station wagons. If you were a kid in the 70s or 80s, these were the best seat in the car. You faced backward, watched the road disappear behind you, waved at drivers, made faces at strangers. You felt like you had your own private capsule back there. In a rear-end collision, you took the full impact with nothing but a thin piece of sheet metal behind you. No crumple zone, no headrest, no reinforcement, just a child and the bumper of the car that just hit you. Federal safety standards introduced in the late 80s began requiring rear impact protection, headrests, and proper seat belt anchorages. Those flimsy rearward-facing seats could not meet any of those requirements. By the mid-90s, they had disappeared entirely from new vehicles. Parents loved them because kids were entertained and out of the way. Safety engineers knew exactly what happened to those kids in a crash. Nostalgia does not change physics. Metal dashboards, chrome, steel, aluminum, hard, beautiful, gleaming metal dashboards were standard in cars through the mid-60s. They looked incredible, they reflected light, they felt substantial and premium. In a crash, your face met that dashboard at full force with nothing to cushion the impact. Fractured skulls, shattered facial bones, severe lacerations. The dashboard became a blunt weapon aimed at the occupants. FMVSS 201, implemented in stages starting in 1968, required energy-absorbing materials on all interior surfaces. Dashboards had to give under impact. Padding became mandatory. Modern dashboards are designed to deform and cushion. The old metal ones were designed to look good, and they absolutely did. They also turned minor accidents into major trauma cases. Cars looked cooler back then. That is just true. And those metal dashboards would not survive the first round of modern interior safety testing. Non-safety glass windshields. Before 1966, regular glass windshields were common. When they shattered, they broke into large, sharp shards that would slice through anything in their path. Ejections through the windshield were frequent. Lacerations were severe. Drivers and passengers were essentially sitting behind a guillotine waiting for impact. The 1966 Motor Vehicle Safety Act required laminated safety glass in all windshields. 2 layers of glass with a plastic interlayer that holds the pieces together when shattered. The glass still breaks, but it does not fragment into deadly projectiles. Side windows still use tempered glass that breaks into small chunks, but windshields must be laminated. The difference in survivability is measurable in thousands of lives per year. Clear, beautiful glass that turned into knives in every crash, completely banned. Bias ply tires. These were the standard tire construction from the beginning of automotive history through the early 70s. Plies of fabric ran at angles across the tire, creating a strong but inflexible structure. They were cheap to manufacture, they were easy to repair, and they had catastrophic handling characteristics at highway speeds. Bias ply tires generated enormous heat, were prone to sudden blowouts, had terrible wet traction, and would lose grip with almost no warning. Radial tires, with plies running perpendicular to the direction of travel, became mandatory on new passenger cars through a combination of safety standards and market pressure by the late 70s. Radials run cooler, last longer, grip better, and fail more predictably. The difference in accident rates was so stark that insurance companies started adjusting premiums based on tire type. Bias ply tires are still legal for certain vintage and agricultural applications, but no modern passenger car uses them. They were the standard for decades. They were also objectively dangerous in ways that became undeniable once radials became common. Unregulated fuel tanks and filler neck placement. For decades, fuel tanks were placed wherever was convenient for packaging, sometimes directly behind the rear axle, sometimes in the rear crumple zone, sometimes with the filler neck on top of the rear fender where a side impact would rupture it immediately. The Ford Pinto became the most infamous example, but it was not an outlier. It was just the one that got publicized. Rear-end collisions would rupture the tank, spray fuel over hot exhaust components, and turn a survivable accident into a fire. FMVSS 301, introduced in phases starting in 1968 and strengthened repeatedly through the 70s, required fuel system integrity in crashes. Tanks had to be placed outside crumple zones. Filler necks had to seal on impact. Fuel lines had to resist rupture. Modern vehicles have fuel tanks in protected locations with multiple redundant shutoff systems. The old ones had a metal box full of gasoline in the most vulnerable part of the car. Hundreds of people burned to death in accidents. They survived long enough to understand what was happening. That is why the regulations were written. Vacuum-powered windshield wipers. This sounds like a joke, but it was real. Wipers on many cars through the 50s and 60s were powered by engine vacuum. When you accelerated and engine load increased, vacuum dropped. The wipers slowed down or stopped entirely. You are driving in heavy rain. Visibility is already compromised. You accelerate to merge or pass. Your wipers stop. You are now blind in traffic in a rainstorm because you pressed the accelerator. Electric wipers became standard in the late 60s, and no modern vehicle uses vacuum assist for wipers. The engineering logic made sense at the time. Vacuum was free and already available, but the real-world outcome was predictably disastrous. People died because their wipers quit in the middle of a storm, completely banned by simple obsolescence and common sense. Hood ornaments and external trim that acted as pedestrian spears. Cadillac fins, chrome spears on Pontiac hoods, the Mercedes star, Jaguar leaping cats. These were not just decorative, they were brand identity made metal. They were also extraordinarily effective at causing severe injuries to pedestrians in low-speed impacts. European pedestrian safety regulations, introduced in phases starting in the early 2000s, essentially banned any external protrusion that could not deform on impact. The regulations measured head impact criteria, leg impact forces, and required specific energy absorption characteristics. Pop-up hood ornaments that retract on impact became common for a while, then even those disappeared. Modern cars are smooth and rounded for aerodynamics and safety. The old ones had chrome daggers sticking out in every direction. Beautiful to look at, absolutely illegal on modern vehicles. And those massive chrome bumpers would not survive the first round of pedestrian impact testing. If you are the kind of person who wonders why cars changed in ways nobody explains, I have put together a complete timeline of every major automotive safety regulation, what it required, and what specific feature or design it replaced. It is organized by decade with the crash data and fatality statistics that drove each regulation. Grab it at the link in the description. It is the reference I wish existed when I started researching this. Adjustable shoulder belts mounted to the door. These appeared in the 80s as a compromise solution to passive restraint requirements. The shoulder belt attached to the door frame or the door itself, and when you opened the door, the belt moved out of the way, closed the door, and you were theoretically restrained. In practice, people would sit on the lap belt portion and only use the shoulder belt, which meant in a crash they would submarine under the belt or be severely injured by the belt itself with no lap restraint. Worse, in a side impact, the door would deform and the belt anchor would move, rendering the restraint useless exactly when it was needed. The introduction of affordable airbags in the 90s made door-mounted belts obsolete. Modern shoulder belts anchor to the B-pillar or seat structure, not the door. Those motorized belts that crawled along a track when you opened the door were bizarre, annoying, and ineffective. They met the letter of the passive restraint law while completely missing the point, banned by better technology and common sense. Carburetors without backfire flame arresters. Carburetors mix air and fuel before it enters the engine. Under certain conditions, especially during deceleration or with a rich mixture, the engine could backfire through the carburetor. Gasoline vapor in the carburetor would ignite. Flames would shoot out the top of the air cleaner. In an enclosed engine bay with fuel lines and wiring nearby, this could and did start vehicle fires. Emissions regulations in the 70s began requiring positive crankcase ventilation and evaporative emissions controls that reduced the likelihood of backfires, and fuel injection, which became dominant in the 80s, eliminated the problem entirely. Carburetors are not banned outright, but any carburetor on a modern emissions-controlled vehicle must have flame arresters, check valves, and backfire suppression. The old open-element air cleaners with no flame protection are illegal on any vehicle sold in the last 40 years. Mechanics who worked on these cars in the 60s and 70s all have stories about engine fires from backfires. It was considered normal. It was also completely preventable. Bench front seats with no headrests, 3 across the front. Your girlfriend could sit in the middle, no console, no buckets, just one long padded bench. Also no headrest, which meant in a rear-end collision your head snapped backward with nothing to stop it. Whiplash injuries were epidemic, severe neck trauma, spinal damage. FMVSS 202, introduced in 1969, required head restraints on the front outboard seats. By the late 70s, center seating positions also required restraints if they had shoulder belts. Bench seats themselves are not banned, but the lack of head restraints is. Modern trucks with bench seats have integrated headrests for all positions. The old ones had nothing. You just hoped you did not get rear-ended hard enough to break your neck. Simple, elegant seating. Catastrophic injury rates. Those flat benches with no head support are gone. Exhaust systems that vented inside the passenger compartment. This was not a design feature. It was a design failure that was tolerated for decades. Rust holes in exhaust systems, poor sealing at manifold gaskets, and inadequate ventilation meant carbon monoxide would seep into the cabin. People would get drowsy. People would lose consciousness. People died in their driveways warming up the car in winter with the garage door closed. Emissions standards and cabin air quality regulations introduced in the 70s required sealed exhaust systems, catalytic converters that reduced carbon monoxide output, and cabin pressure systems that kept outside air from entering except through filtered vents. Modern cars have multiple co-sensors and sealed cabins. The old ones were essentially gas chambers if the exhaust system had any leaks at all. It was so common that everyone just accepted that cars smelled like exhaust and you got headaches on long trips. That is not normal. That is poisoning, completely unacceptable by modern standards. Non-padded sun visors and rigid interior trim. Sun visors were metal or hard plastic frames with a thin covering. Grab handles were chrome-plated steel. Roof rails were unpadded metal. In a rollover or side impact, occupants would strike these surfaces with full force. Head injuries were severe and frequent. FMVSS 201 required padding on all interior surfaces that a head or body could strike. Sun visors now have energy-absorbing cores. Grab handles are designed to break away or deform. Roof rails are padded. The difference in injury severity is measurable. Those chrome grab handles looked premium and substantial. They also fractured skulls. Modern interiors look softer and feel cheaper in some ways. They are also designed to crush and absorb energy instead of transferring it directly into your body. Form followed function. Function was survival. Single reservoir brake systems. Every car built before 1968 had a single brake fluid reservoir and a single hydraulic circuit. If you developed a leak anywhere in the system, you lost all braking. Brake pedal goes to the floor. No warning, no backup, you just lost your brakes entirely. FMVSS 105, introduced in 1968, required dual-circuit brake systems with separate front and rear hydraulic circuits. If one fails, you still have partial braking. Modern systems have diagonal split circuits, so you retain one front and one rear brake even in a failure. Anti-lock systems add another layer of redundancy. The old single-circuit systems were simple and easy to service. They were also a single point of total failure. Mechanics from that era all have stories about customers who came in with no brakes and no idea how close they came to a catastrophic accident. Those single reservoir master cylinders are illegal on anything built after 1967. Chrome bumpers with no energy absorption. Bumpers were decorative and structural, but they absorbed zero impact energy. They were rigid steel bars bolted directly to the frame. In a low-speed collision, all the energy transferred directly into the vehicle structure and the occupants. Whiplash rates were high. Repair costs were astronomical because even a 5-mile-per-hour impact would crumple fenders, hoods, and grills. FMVSS 215, introduced in 1973 and strengthened in 1979, required bumpers to absorb impacts up to 5 miles per hour without damage to the vehicle's safety systems. Energy-absorbing mounts, deformable structures, and plastic covers became standard. The regulations were later relaxed, which is why modern bumpers crumple more easily, but the principle remained. Those chrome bumpers looked incredible. They were also completely ineffective at the one job a bumper is supposed to do, banned by function. Gas tank caps with no rollover valves. Fuel filler caps were simple vented caps. In a rollover, fuel would pour out of the filler neck onto the ground, the hot exhaust, or the occupants. Fires were common. FMVSS 301 required rollover valves in fuel systems that seal the tank in an inverted position. Modern caps and filler necks have spring-loaded valves, check balls, and multiple redundant seals. Fuel does not pour out even if the vehicle is completely inverted. The old vented caps were simple and worked fine until the car flipped over. Then they turned a survivable accident into an inferno. Those basic screw-on caps with a single gasket are illegal on modern vehicles. Unbelted cargo areas in station wagons and vans. The rear cargo area of a wagon or van was just open space. Kids would ride back there on road trips. No seats, no belts, no restraints, just kids rolling around in the back. In a crash or even a hard stop, those unrestrained occupants became projectiles. They would hit the back of the front seats, the rear door, or go through the windshield. Seatbelt laws and child restraint laws introduced in the 80s made it illegal to transport passengers without proper restraints. Cargo areas are now cargo areas. Passenger areas require seats, belts, and anchorages that meet crash standards. Every parent who grew up in the 70s has a story about riding in the back of a wagon. Every safety engineer knows what happened in the crashes. Those open cargo areas are now illegal for passenger transport. Non-collapsible steering wheels with rigid spokes. The steering wheel itself was a solid casting. Metal spokes, no padding, no give. In a crash, your chest hit that wheel with full force. The spokes would break ribs or puncture lungs. FMVSS 203 required energy-absorbing steering wheels and hubs. Modern wheels have deformable structures, padding, and airbags. The old wheels were designed to give the driver grip and control. They were not designed to be hit, but they were hit constantly. Those beautiful thin-rimmed wooden or metal wheels are illegal on anything newer than the late 60s. Gorgeous, completely unforgiving in a crash. Unregulated aftermarket suspension lifts and modifications. Lifting a truck or SUV changes the center of gravity, alters crash dynamics, and changes the height at which the vehicle strikes other cars or pedestrians. For decades, there were no regulations on how much you could lift a vehicle or what safety standards modified suspensions had to meet. Rollovers increased. In crashes with smaller vehicles, the lifted truck would override the other car's crumple zones and strike directly into the passenger compartment. State and federal regulations introduced in the 90s and 2000s began limiting lift heights, requiring bumper height limits, and mandating stability control on taller vehicles. Straight axle swaps and extreme lifts are now illegal in many states without engineering certification. The modifications are not banned outright, but the Wild West era of unregulated suspension changes is over. Those sky-high trucks were a statement. They were also a measurable hazard to everyone else on the road. Non-laminated side glass in commercial vehicles. Buses and vans use tempered glass in side windows, which shatters into small pieces on impact. In a rollover, those windows would shatter and occupants would be ejected. School bus regulations introduced in the 2000s began requiring laminated side glass that holds together even when broken. The glass can still crack, but it stays in place and prevents ejections. Ejection is one of the most lethal outcomes in any crash. Keeping occupants inside the vehicle dramatically increases survival rates. Tempered glass was cheaper and easier to replace. Laminated glass saves lives. Modern buses and passenger vans are required to have laminated glass in all windows. Those old buses with plain tempered glass that would shatter and fall out in chunks are no longer legal for new production. Manual chokes on carbureted engines without emissions controls. Chokes enriched the fuel mixture for cold starts. Manual chokes required the driver to pull a cable, start the engine, and push the choke back in as the engine warmed. If you forgot to push it back in, the engine ran rich, wasted fuel and produced enormous amounts of carbon monoxide and unburned hydrocarbons. Emissions regulations in the 70s required automatic chokes that adjusted mixture based on engine temperature. Fuel injection eliminated the need for chokes entirely. Manual chokes are not explicitly banned, but any vehicle subject to emissions testing cannot pass with a manually controlled choke that allows prolonged rich operation. Those under-dash choke knobs are gone. The emissions impact was too severe to allow. Non-breakaway rearview mirrors. Interior and exterior mirrors were rigidly mounted. In a crash, especially in vehicles without airbags, occupants would strike the rearview mirror. Lacerations, eye injuries, severe facial trauma. Modern mirrors are required to have breakaway mounts or deformable bases. The mirror detaches or pivots on impact instead of acting as a fixed blade. Exterior mirrors must fold or break away in pedestrian impacts. The old chrome mirrors bolted directly to the windshield frame or door are illegal on new vehicles. They looked substantial and premium. They also caused injuries in every serious crash, banned by basic impact standards. Exposed fuel injection systems without shields. Early mechanical fuel injection systems ran at high pressure with metal lines routed through the engine bay. In a crash or engine fire, those lines would rupture and spray atomized fuel directly onto hot engine components. The fire would spread instantly. Modern fuel injection systems require shielded lines, quick disconnect fittings that seal on separation, and pressure relief valves. Fuel rails are designed to contain fuel even if damaged. Those early fuel injection systems were engineering marvels. They were also extraordinarily dangerous in any impact that breached the lines. Shielding and containment are now mandatory. Asbestos brake pads and clutch linings. Asbestos was the perfect friction material, heat-resistant, durable, effective, also carcinogenic. Mechanics who worked on brakes for years were exposed to asbestos dust every single day. Mesothelioma rates among auto mechanics were significantly elevated. The EPA began regulating asbestos in the 70s, and by the early 90s, asbestos brake pads were effectively banned in the United States. Modern friction materials use ceramic, metallic, and organic compounds. They work as well or better without the cancer risk. Every brake job in the 60s and 70s released asbestos dust into the air. Mechanics inhaled it. Customers inhaled it. It was considered normal. It was killing people slowly, completely banned. Every one of these regulations was written in blood. Not theoretical danger, not hypothetical harm, actual deaths, actual injuries, years of preventable trauma that kept happening until someone finally mandated a change. The manufacturers did not volunteer these improvements. The market did not demand them. The regulations forced them into existence because the cost of not having them was measured in bodies. Next time you are in a modern car and you think about how heavy the doors are, how the dashboard gives when you press it, how the steering wheel has that thick padded center, remember what it replaced. Remember that someone died so you would not have to. Drop a comment and tell me which of these you had no idea was banned, or which one you genuinely missed despite understanding why it had to go. Next time I am breaking down the features that automakers quietly removed in the last 10 years that nobody noticed were gone. Some of them you used every day, or you used to.